I am Vanessa Conlin, and as part of the Unfiltered Wine Club, I'm going to be tasting the Jacques Lorent Grande Reserve Champagne. So this is what's called a multi-vintage or a non-vintage champagne. So for many, many years, I always saw envy on a wine list or in reference to a multi-vintage wine, meaning that this has a number of reserve wines from previous vintages that have been blended together that are all in this bottle, as opposed to a vintage champagne, which means that all of the grapes are from one singular harvest, and that harvest year will be printed on the label. Sometime over the last 5 years or so, maybe a little longer, people have sort of started calling it multi-vintage instead of non-vintage, because if you think about it, it's not that there aren't vintages in here, it's just it's a blend of multiple vintages. So this is a MV champagne from the Marne Valley in the region of Champagne. So of course, when we talk about champagne, it has to be from the region of Champagne to be called that. You can make wines or sparkling wines in the same method from the same varieties that they use from the Champagne region of France, but you can't actually call it champagne. This has 3 varieties in it. These are the 3 main varieties that you'll hear as the champagne varieties. In actuality, there are a few others, but they're very rarely seen, so we don't need to rabbit hole that right now. But this is mostly Meunier. You might have also heard this called Pinot Meunier in the past, but we don't call it Pinot Meunier anymore. We just say Meunier. Meunier is a black grape variety. This has Pinot Noir, which is also a black grape variety. And of course, we've got Chardonnay. But when you pour it, as you can see, we have a white wine. That is because to produce a pale wine from black varieties, you really only need to do one thing, which is press the juice off of its skins. Now you wanted this to be done very, very gently so it doesn't pick up any color or tannin or astringency. This is why often in Champagne, they'll have what they call press houses, which are closer to where the vineyards are instead of the winery, which may be sort of far away, because you want to do this as early as possible, as gently as possible. Now, another thing about this wine is it's labeled Brut. Brut is an indication of the sweetness level in Champagne. And when it's called Brut, that can be anywhere from 0 to 12% grams per liter in this bottle. Now, sweetness in Champagne is different than is achieved in some other parts of the world where fermentation might be arrested, either just through stopping the fermentation, through chilling it down, or sulfur dioxide, or in the case of fortified wines, you can actually stop fermentation by arresting it with spirit, which will kill the yeast. In those cases, you would be left with a wine where not all of the fermentable sugars have been consumed by the yeast, and therefore there is sweetness in the wine. This is not the method in Champagne. In Champagne, there are 2 fermentations. The first one, you make a still wine or a base wine. This is a very sort of not pleasant to drink wine. It's very high in acid, but through a second fermentation, which happens in the bottle, which is part of the Champagne method or the method champenoise, a second fermentation happens, and then that wine is left in contact with the lees or the dead yeast cells. So this raises the alcoholic content just a tinge, but also the wine will start to pick up these beautiful notes from that maturation in the bottle. So sometimes you can get these sort of biscuit, marzipan notes in Champagne. If you've ever experienced that, that is coming from that contact in the bottle on the lees. Now, before it gets sent to market, of course, we want to get the lees out of the bottle. And so what happens is a process called disgorgement. And disgorgement, it removes the yeast from the bottle, but at this moment in time, they also have the opportunity to add a little bit of sweetness if they like. And the bottle will not have been under a cork up until this point. It'll be under, well, it can be under a cork or a crown cap, but it's not the final cork that you'll see in the bottle when you buy it at the store or you receive it in your unfiltered shipment. So when that's removed, they can top it, you'll lose a little bit of wine. So they can top it up with wine that has no sweetness, or they can top it up with wine that has a little bit to a lot. This is still on the fairly dry side. This is 8 grams per liter. And I would say when we taste this wine, I bet you don't actually perceive any sweetness in this wine, because often dosage is not to actually make the wine taste sweet. It's just to add to the overall complexity. And in some cases to kind of tame the acidity. Because keep in mind, Champagne is a very cold region. This is sort of at the northernmost places where you can actually ripen grapes for wine. So it can be quite austere, but this dosage can actually sort of just mellow it out just a touch. One other thing before we taste is this is a cooperative, or you'll see CM on the label, meaning cooperative manipulant. That means that there are multiple growers that have all contributed fruit to make this one wine. Now, why would you do that? Well, there are lots of very, very small growers who don't have the means or maybe even inclination to make wine as well as grow the grapes. So in this case, they've grown the grapes, they've made the wine in a co-op, and there's actually 250 different growers that have all contributed just to this one bottling, which is pretty cool. So let's taste this. Of course, it's sparkling. You can see I'm tasting mine out of a white wine glass. I'm not using a flute, because to really put my nose in this glass, it would be very difficult with a flute, and I still want to experience everything this wine has to offer. So I definitely get some of that kind of biscuity marzipan note that I described before. There are 2 black grape varieties in this, as we talked about, Meunier and Pinot Noir. And on the nose, even though you can see this is a white wine, there are some sort of red berry notes on the nose, kind of like raspberry, cherry, and then a ton of just really bright citrus as well, and some floral notes. So let's taste this. I taste this the way that I do a still wine, so I still swish it all around my mouth. And then it's extra hard to spit though, because it's champagne and I just kind of don't want to, but I'm going to. So you get that great freshness that champagne is known for, high acid. My mouth is really watering. I get on the finish more of that kind of red fruited note, that berry note that I noticed on the nose. Again, a lot of citrus, kind of an orange zest and lemon zest is coming out as the wine kind of lingers on my palate. This is very light in body. Of course, the CO2 will contribute to that feeling, but it's a very sort of ethereal feel on the palate, kind of begging for some salty food or some fatty food. Or of course, you can always enjoy champagne by itself, but if you haven't tried food pairings with it, I highly recommend it because it absolutely loves to be paired at the table.